For the last 1,600 years, Christians around the world remember the last days of Jesus' life during Holy Week. Today is Holy Monday. Holy Monday remembers the day Jesus came into Jerusalem's temple with a homemade whip in his hand. The temple was supposed to be a place where pilgrims from all over the world could come and offer sacrifices and receive forgiveness from God. But the religious establishment had decided that the temple courtyard, a space normally reserved for non-Jews to worship God, should also double as a livestock market for sacrificial animals. This guaranteed tighter control and higher profits for the Jewish elite who controlled the markets, but at the expense of the ability for non-Jewish pilgrims to have a place to worship. Instead of prayers in languages from all around the world, the temple was filled with the braying of animals, the haggling of vendors, and the stench of manure. The worship of the nations was sacrificed so that some could line their pockets. Angry, Jesus flips over tables and prevents merchants from moving through the courtyard in a direct challenge to the priorities of Jerusalem's religious establishment. With a captive audience, Jesus then quotes from the prophets Isaiah and Jeremiah and says, "Is it not written, 'My house will be called a house of prayer for all the nations,' but you have made it a den of robbers." The crowd sees the truth in what Jesus is saying. Israel's religious establishment has marginalized the worship of non-Jews for money. The temple was meant to be a place for all people to experience God's presence and forgiveness, and that is being stolen from them. Publicly exposed and cornered, the religious elite plot to kill Jesus. But Jesus isn't just a prophet exposing corruption. Jesus is acting with authority. He calls the temple my house. Part of the reason Jesus takes such dramatic action is because he is God, and God has the right to change, critique, and even tear down his temple if he wants to. Holy Monday is good news because Jesus announces he has come to restore God's temple to its original purpose. The temple was supposed to be a place where all people can make sacrifices and receive forgiveness. So on Good Monday, Jesus' actions prove he will end a temple regime committed to greed and ethnic pride so that a better temple can rise to never exclude the nations again. And Jesus himself is this renewed temple. His body is our temple. He is where forgiveness is offered to all people. And in him there is no room for merchants or money because his forgiveness is free. But when Jesus stops the buying and selling of sacrificial animals, he isn't just dooming a corrupt system. He's also offering himself as an alternative sacrifice. Turning over the tables is also Jesus' way of saying that he is willing to be the sacrifice that grants all nations the forgiveness of God. So I pray that on this Holy Monday, you will accept Jesus as your new temple and as the free sacrifice that grants God's forgiveness to people from all nations.
So the next morning, when Jesus sees a fig tree with no fruit on it, he curses it and it withers. It's a prophetic symbol to his disciples that the current leadership of Israel's temple has forgotten its purpose. It is corrupt, dead, and must be destroyed. The disciples miss the symbolism and only ask how the fig tree withered so quickly. Jesus replies, "Truly I tell you, if you have faith and do not doubt, not only can you do what was done to the fig tree, but also you can say to this mountain, 'Go, throw yourself into the sea,' and it will be done." But Jesus isn't explaining how the disciples can go and curse their own fig trees or throw their problems into the ocean. He's telling them how the religious establishment of Israel will fall. When the disciples pray in faith, the mountain that the temple is built on will crumble. Through the disciples' faith, Israel's corrupt leadership will fall. Jesus has come to cleanse the temple of its dead religion, and Jesus expects his disciples to share that responsibility. They are part of his rebellion against the corrupt religious status quo. In the verses following today's passage, the religious leaders question what right Jesus has to claim the end of their temple system. Jesus responds over and over again with stories and parables that reveal their corruption. And then, like the prophets before him, Jesus predicts the destruction of Israel's temple by an invading army. The religious leaders can't take it anymore and continue their schemes to kill Jesus. Holy Tuesday is good news because Jesus announces the end of a corrupt religious order and the dawning of a new global people of God.
Holy Wednesday remembers the day when both faithful Mary and treacherous Judas prepare Jesus to die. After an increasingly public string of challenges to both Rome and the temple system, the religious elite believe that Jesus is a threat to their kingdom and religion. If Jesus is not killed, they believe Rome will come, take what little power they have left, and destroy their temple. Believing it's better for one man to die than a whole nation to be lost, the religious elite make their final plans to kill Jesus. But meanwhile, a woman named Mary takes a jar of perfume valued at 300 pieces of silver, or about a year's salary, cracks it open, pours it over Jesus' head and feet, and rubs it into his skin with her hair. Not only lavish, but socially awkward and humiliating. Horrified, Judas speaks up for the disciples, and he calls Mary's display wasteful and argues the perfume should have been sold and spent on the poor. But Jesus quiets Judas and tells the disciples Mary is doing the right thing. He says, "You will always have the poor among you, but you will not always have me." Jesus isn't dismissing care for the poor with this statement. He's highlighting the value of what he has come to do. Like the religious elite have said, the only way to save God's people is if he is killed. Mary understands that Jesus must die, so she embalms him with perfume in advance. To her, it's no waste to offer her most precious possession if it prepares Jesus for the burial that will save God's people. But Judas realizes Jesus is no longer useful to him. So he sneaks away and tells the religious elite he will betray Jesus for a tenth of what Mary poured out. Strangely, everybody in this story is preparing for Jesus to die. The religious elite offer a bribe to more easily capture Jesus. Judas betrays Jesus for another month's expenses, and Mary prepares him to be laid in a tomb. Even more strangely, everybody believes Jesus must die in order to save them. Judas thought Jesus' death would save his financial status. The religious elite thought Jesus' death would prevent Rome from breathing more heavily down their necks. But Holy Wednesday is good news because Jesus announces that his death will save God's people, not from Rome or poverty, but from death itself. Mary had just seen Jesus raise her brother from the dead, and she hoped that if Jesus dies, then all God's people can be saved from death. Jesus, to her, is worth her most precious possession because Jesus has the power to give eternal life to all who ask. So I pray that on this Holy Wednesday, you will accept that Jesus must die in order to save you, his people, from death forever.